Okay. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuttapada Kamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saritam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Shta Om Akyantamirandasha Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuru Militamina Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitam Ina Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadha Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Madeka Bando Matsangen Maguro Man Mahadana Manistaraka Madbhagya Madananda Namo Sute. So I'm just going to finish the passage that we started yesterday, chapter 15. Angira Rishi and Narada Muni have arrived to give instructions on Tattva in order to dissipate the lamentation of Chittiketu. This seems to be the general standard of removing lamentation from the psyches of the conditioned souls, is to reflect on Tattva, reality. Narada Muni says as much to Yudhishthira Maharaj at the end of chapter 15. And it seems to be the consistent pattern, even adopted by the demons, such as Hiranyakashipu, when his sister-in-law was lamenting the death of her husband and Hiranyakashipu's brother, Hiranyaksha. Then Hiranyakashipu pacified her by speaking knowledge about the distinction between matter and spirit. And Krishna does the same thing in Bhagavad Gita. And this is the general method, it seems, of removing lamentation from the psyche, is to reflect upon or else hear from those who have reflected upon the distinction between matter and spirit. So Angira Rishi and Narada Muni are giving such statements to that effect in order to remove the lamentation out of the psyche of Chittiketu. So we covered several of those statements yesterday, and we're going to conclude with 2 verses, short class, and then we'll take some questions if there are any. So this is verse number 7. Dehena dehino rajan deha deho abhichayate. Bija deva yata bhijam deyarta iva shashruta. So as from one seed, another seed is generated, O king. So from one body, the body of the father, through another body, the body of the mother, a third body is generated, the body of a son. As the elements of the material body are eternal, the living entity who appears through these material elements is also eternal. So Chittiketu may not object so much to previous statements, but confirm, and this is Sri Vishwanath's comment, that what you have said previously is true, that I am the Father who, created by the Lord, produced a son who is now dead. Therefore I lament. Yesterday we were hearing that it is the Lord who, through his various agencies, gives rise to creation, maintenance, and destruction. So through one agent, there can be creation. Through another agent, such as the government, there can be sustenance. And through another agent, like a murderer, there could be destruction. And these are all forms of the Lord. This is a non-dualistic way of looking at life, as we were discussing yesterday. So he says it is true that I have become the Father, as you know, I'm empowered by God, or representing God, have become the Father of the Son who is now dead, and therefore that is the cause of my lamentation. So then the question, as is the hypothetical question posed to Arjuna in the beginning of chapter 2 also. Are you lamenting for, who are you lamenting for? That is the question. For whom is this lamentation? Is it for the body? Now, if the lamentation is for the body is right in front of you. So why are you lamenting? There's the body, it is in front of you. The last line of the verse says here that Dehyarta iva shashrataha. So the elements of the material body, they are eternal. They cannot be destroyed. So therefore, there's no cause of lamentation for that body. If the lamentation is for the body is right in front of you. So if he says, no, my lamentation is not for the body, but it is for the soul that has left the body. So in response to that, they may say that the soul, Dehyarta iva shashrataha, the soul is also eternal. It cannot perish. And also, since the soul is eternal, you are not the cause of the creation of the soul. So therefore, you have no cause for lament even in that regard. Just as in empirical life or embodied life, souls that you know and their bodies, they go elsewhere. I mean, in other words, they're still alive, but they go elsewhere. You, like, for example, many of us, we were all in Chicago together for a period of time. And now we've gone elsewhere. We still exist, but we've gone elsewhere. And we may not see those people so much, aside from through the Zoom. We may not see them so much because they have gone elsewhere. So do we lament that? No, maybe a little bit we lament, but we know they're alive. They've simply gone elsewhere. So the soul is also alive. It has simply gone elsewhere. So there's no cause for lamentation even in that regard. So whether you accept that the material body is the self or you accept that the soul is the self, in both cases, there's no reason for lamentation. So your lamentation is only due to illusion or ignorance. And that is the next verse. So the next verse and the last statement of Angira Rishi and Narnamuni. As for, read that already. Now my friend is calling. Dehi deha vibhago yam, aviveka kritapura, jati vyakti vibhago yam yata vastuni kalpita. So divisions of generalization and specification, such as nationality and individuality, are the imaginations of persons who are not advanced in knowledge. So honestly, admittedly, this verse, I wasn't 100% sure what it was trying to convey fully. I mean, from Prabhupada's purport is very straightforward, but from the language used in the verse, it's not 100% clear to me. But first of all, aviveka krita pura. So aviveka krita means, vivek means discernment. And discernment here means discernment between consciousness and matter. So avivek means the inability to discern the difference between consciousness and matter. So aviveka krita, this lamentation of the last verse, you're lamenting for the body, which is not really a lamentation, because it is, the elements are eternal. You're lamenting for the soul, that is also not really lamentation. So this lamentation must be rooted in avivek, the cause, aviveka krita pura. The cause of it is beginningless ignorance. This is the cause. This beginningless inability to discern the distinction between matter and spirit. And as a result of this inability to discern the difference between matter and spirit, you cannot make out the distinction between dehi deha vibhago yam, this division between the body and who is the proprietor of the body. You think them to be the same, or you think there is mutual dependence. Now he gives an example. Jati vyakti vibhago yam. It is like this division between jati and vyakti. So the word jati means, well, it's translated here as generalization. And the word vyakti is translated here as specification. So for example, the word jati also means like family or class. So an example of a jati is cowness. Cowness is an example of a jati, or like a class, cow. And all cows who exist inside the category of cow, they all possess cowness. So vyakti means a very specific cow. There could be a black cow, there can be a white cow, there can be a brown cow, etc. This is called vyakti, a specification of a particular entity within the class. But all such cows, whether black, brown, or white, or whatever, they all exist within the category or the jati of cow. So cowness exists in all the specifications. But if those cows cease to exist, if the black cow dies, the white cow dies, etc., does that mean that the category itself dies? That therefore there is no more cowness? There is no more jati of cow? No, they do not have mutual dependence on each other. The category cow is not dependent on the existence of a specific cow. It exists apart from that cow. Although when the cow is manifested, that cow is I don't want to use the word shelter. That cow is also having cowness in it. So when you see the cow, everyone will agree that all cows have cowness in it. So that would make one think that cowness is dependent on the existence of a cow. But if that were true, that cowness was dependent on the existence of a cow, then when a cow dies, that means cowness will somehow be altered. For every cow that dies, that will impact the jati of cowness, but the jati of cowness is not impacted. The jati exists apart from the specifications that manifest within that category. So although when the specific vastu cow is there, it looks like there's a mutual dependence between cow and cowness, but only those who are not theologians, basically, because no one thinks like this. There's literally no one thinks like this. So except for theologians, they're the only ones who think in terms of these abstract categories. So unless you're a theologian, no one thinks like that. So it's just natural, like, okay, yeah, cows have cowness, sure. And there appears to be mutual dependence, but only for those who are avivek, not discerning, or in other words, not theologians. They don't see this distinction. Yata bastuni kalpita. So they imagine this mutual dependence, and they imagine this mutual dependence between body and soul, or between jati and vyakti. When the two exist, there's a distinction between the two. And one of them is eternal. The jati is eternal. And the things that manifest within the jati, they are here today and gone tomorrow. So only for a person who is avivek, they don't make this particular discernment. And therefore, not being discerning, that is in fact the cause of lamentation, or in other words, ignorance. So one should give up their ignorance. That's the point there. Of course, how this ignorance is given up, so that must be coming up later. Ignorance can only be given up, as we like to say, Gaudiya Vaishnavas, that is, it can be given up by bhakti. But the basic point here is that the lamentation has nothing, the lamentation is not due to the circumstances around us. The lamentation is due to a remote cause, that remote cause being the beginningless ignorance of the jiva. So unless that remote cause has come, then our lives are always linked to inevitable sorrow, as is what's happening to Shritaketu in the right now. So this sort of knowledge is a little bit hard to access when you're in a situation of distress. So therefore, it is valuable to reflect upon these things before the situation of distress comes, so that when you are in distress and an Angir Muni personality comes before you, speaks in such a way that can trigger your access to that knowledge and allow you to appreciate that, yes, there's actually my avidya that is the cause of this sorrow, and it's not the situation before me that is the cause of the sorrow. And therefore, to solve the sorrow issue, I have to take shelter of bhakti. Duko shadam ta apidu kamatati yaham bhumam brahmami badame tavatasa yoga. Any other attempt to solve sorrow will be another sorrow added to the original sorrow. Duko shadam ta apidukam. Atadiyaham. Atadiyaham also means avivek krita in this particular verse. It's due to ignorance of the reality or the self. Bhumam brahmami, souls are traveling all over the world without this discernment. And therefore, the most common emotion shared in this world is in fact lamentation. Bhumam brahmami. This is the most common emotional state of the soul. Fear, lamentation, and delusion, these are always really linked together. Shoka, moha, bhaya. But lamentation is quite prominent out of the three. It means prominent means the one that is quite prominently felt viscerally. We have a lot of fears. Even right now, as I'm speaking, there are many fears that actually govern our life, but it's not felt viscerally. only when you're in face to face with a particular scenario of life is the fear face, quite viscerally. But lamentation is one of those emotions that's like very steadily felt throughout the day. Your partner doesn't reciprocate with you properly. You're lamenting about it. You're frustrated. If something bad happens at the workspace, you're frustrated. So this lamentation is quite consistent. And we blame or often, scapegoat the responsibility of removing our own ignorance to the circumstances around us. And therefore, in doing so, we add sorrow to sorrow. So that's the best I could do with that one. It wasn't 100% clear. But so last verse here, I'm just going to read it. Thus, enlightened by the instructions of Narada and Angita, King Chitraketu became hopeful with knowledge. Wiping his shriveled face with his hand, the king began to speak. Nice. So, Any questions about this? Or I know there was a question yesterday also, but I'm going to pause their short class because I'm going to go to the park and finish some study that I was doing yesterday. I'm looking at private messages. Okay, so we have in reference to the point that Chitraketu's lamentation is due his illusion only, it's interesting how we are such subjective beings who have feelings about everything in a world that is actually quite cold and mechanical, and even our bodies, which Krishna refers to as a machine, have a finite preset duration of existence. The contrast between our inner world and the outside reality is so stark. Yes, it is. That's a very nice reflection. Okay, Harishan has a question also.
This question is kind of bleeding over from the last week when I was in New Vrindavan with my Guru Maharaj, and then, what you're discussing this morning, because it's been in my mind. He was talking about this idea of, while chanting, doing Bhuta Shuddhi, so that the false ego is that effect of the false ego, which makes us think we're this body is maybe temporarily. He didn't use the word temporarily. This is how I interpreted it. We don't chant the holy names under the force of the false ego, thinking that we're this body and I and mine and all that, right? But we chant the holy names, having taken shelter of the holy names and our identity as servants. And then this morning, we're talking about Chitraketu's lamentation. So this very stark contrast between information, which is we're not this body, both from the Shastra and also from the sages, and his lack of awareness, right? So the question that I have is, what is the difference between knowing that we're Krishna's servants, we're not the body, but then actually having deep down inside, because just that information alone doesn't get rid of the avidya that is at the foundation of our material existence, right? So of course we hear often about Gyan and Vigyan, but those are still concepts for me. Like, what does it actually mean once we know we're not this body, but then what does it mean to actually, and we're servants of Krishna, so that we actually move with that foundational understanding in this world. So it's not, because right now, even if I temporarily just sit and close my eyes and think, okay, I'm not this body, I'm a servant of Krishna, like maybe for a few seconds I might, have that conception in my mind. But then as soon as I open my eyes and I'm back again in this world, I'm still operating very much as the body. I might do some aropa siddha bhakti, like, this food I'm eating is prasad, and these things belong to Krishna. I might do some of that aropa siddha bhakti, but I'm really wondering, what is the difference between awareness and information? Does that question make sense?
Yes, of course. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Klesho adhikataras tesham avyakta sakta chetasam. He's speaking about those. Arjuna has asked a question: which yogi, who is the highest knower of yoga in your opinion? Is it the bhaktas that you've just talked about in the middle 6 chapters? Or is it the Gyanis that you spoke about in the first 6 chapters? This is chapter 12, beginning of chapter 12. And then Krishna just very matter-of-factly says it's the bhaktas. And then he says, but the Gyanis also come to attain me, but their path is very difficult. And then this verse is, Klesho adhikataras tesham avyakta sakta chetasam. He says to the the path of trying to imagine the unmanifest and the impersonal, it causes klesha, it causes misery, because it is very difficult for those who are embodied. So the soul being kind of, in this sense, but the soul in fact being impersonal, to try to abstractly think about, to hear the information that I'm not the body and I'm just a soul, and then try to reflect on that and engage in the world is klesha adhikatara station avyakta satachetasan, and it causes great misery, basically. So the bhaktas, they have a different strategy that they try to relate to the body and to God, of course, in terms of how to say this. They basically engage as holding in their mind, kind of like the concept of a siddha deha. Our body is a deha, and there's also such a thing as a spiritual body, a siddha deha, right? Both are there. And so just as the siddha deha is serving Krishna, and when we attain perfection in life in bhakti, then we will attain a siddha deha by which we can, serve Krishna forevermore without any impediments. So also in the life of a sadhaka, we engage like that in relationship to Krishna. Our body is not a siddha deha, but it is a deha with senses, just as a siddha deha has senses. And just as a siddha deha is always engaged in relationship to Krishna, then we use our bodies in the here and now to engage in the service of Krishna. So this is a bhakta strategy of living the concept that I am not this body. So if you're not this body, what body are you? So for bhaktas, we will say we are the siddha deha. We are that body. We're not this material body, but we are the siddha deha that is awaiting me when I attain perfection. I am that body, actually, or I will come to be that body, so to speak. So in the right now, I'm using the deha that I have now and engaging it as if with a siddha deha. What do you mean by that, as if with a siddha deha? Well, the siddha deha has everything is engaged in relationship to Krishna. So I will engage this deha in relationship to Krishna. And this is how I live the you're not this body concept. This is how I can practically live it. Now that becomes a lot easier to live. And it's not abstract as the concept of just like understanding that you're an infinitesimal entity beyond time and space that's not linked to the body. That's very abstract. And it's very hard to live that on a day-to-day basis, or even to reflect on it. It's very difficult. But to think of yourself as a deha, which is very natural because we're conditioned with senses, but engage in those senses directly in Krishna service, that is in fact living on the platform, on the spiritual platform. That's how Prabhupada has always talked about it. You're living as if with a siddha deha, the siddha deha that engages in the service of Krishna. So with this deha, I also engage in the service of Krishna, and that's how I can feel myself, so to say, as spirit. I feel myself as spirit by functioning as spirit. How does spirit function? Well, if you're in the Brahman Jyoti, that it doesn't, so to speak. So it's going to be a little bit difficult. But if you're aiming for the spiritual world, this is how a deha functions in the spiritual world. So in this way, we can gradually viscerally feel ourselves as not this body by feeling ourselves as spirit or spiritual body, and feeling ourselves as. Now, the process of feeling ourselves viscerally like a spiritual body, there's a sequence of the development, through faith and to prema. And in the Madhurya Kandambini, as we mentioned before, in the very last statements, the very last sentences of the Madhurya Kandambini, he speaks about the transformation of the ego from matter to spirit. Like he speaks about those stages in terms of what happens to the identity of the jiva. So that's very interesting and fascinating. So there's a process of the efflorescence of that identity as a siddha deha. And one of the famous verses quoted by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in this regard also. So it's in the Anchalila chapter 4. It's a Bhagavatam verse. I want to pick it up. It's the 11th canto. I think it's chapter 29, but I forget the verse number. Let me see. So this is actually kind of an important verse. So this is in the Anchalila chapter 4. Sanatana Goswami wants to commit the suicide. So Mahaprabhu began chastising him because he said, you've given your body to me, the spiritual master, and actually your body is no longer material, it's spiritual. You know, he says this thing, your swarupa is chindanandamaya, it is complete, replete with spiritual shakti, it's no longer material. And then he says this famous verse that at the time of Diksha Kali Bhakta Kali Atma Samarpan, the disciple surrenders to Krishna in the form of the guru. And at that time, Krishna accepts the disciple to be as good as himself. Well, good as, what do you mean by good as himself? Well, himself, he's a spiritual body. So he accepts his disciple to be as good as himself. In other words, he accepts his disciple to now also have a spiritual body in which it can engage in service to him. There's a meaning there, Atma Samarpana. And then he quotes this verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. So let me, I think, okay, I think I'm close to it. Oh no, I forget where this verse appears. Okay, I thought I had it here. Is it, or maybe it's 199. Hold on.
Are you looking for this verse? The living entity who's subject to report the death attains him
So
gives up all material activities. It's 194.
Yeah. So Martyoya Datyakta Samasta Karma Nivedi Tatma Vichikir Shatome. So Martyaha means a living entity who's subjected to birth and death. So Yada, so when Tyakta Samasta Karma, when he gives up all karma, the meaning of this Tyakta Samasta Karma in the context in which it's presented here is that at the time of initiation, he gives up all karma, Tyakta Samasta Karma, by the process of initiation. So Nivedi Tatma Vichikirshutome. So Krishna, to that Nivedita Atma, to that surrendered soul, Vichikirshitame, me, Krishna saying, me, I desire to do something special for him. That doesn't mean I desire to do something special for that soul who is taking Diksha. So Diksha is important, you know, for all those who are not initiated. Don't think you can get away with becoming Krishna conscious without being initiated. Krishna does not take you to be as good as himself unless you take Diksha. Diksha is practical surrender. And just like sometimes when people come to our kirtan, they say, oh, I appreciate it so much. And after the kirtan, we have donation bowl. So we say, you can all offer donation. So I always joke with the team. I said, giving a donation is practical appreciation. You know, as people are walking out, not giving donations at the kirtan. I said, giving them a practical. So practical surrender is accepting Diksha. That is practical surrender. Tyakta Samasa Karma is a reference to Diksha. Then to that surrendered soul who is taking Diksha, Krishna considers that person to be as good as himself. Vijakirshatome, he is as good as myself. And Vijakirshatome, and here from the commentaries, Krishna wants to do something special for him. So what is that doing something special for this soul? So in the commentaries, it says he desires to give him an imperishable body. That is the special thing that he wants to do for the soul. So tadamritatvam pratipadyamano mayatma bhuyaya chakalpate vai. I'm just reading the translation here. In this way, he becomes fit to enjoy the spiritual bliss derived from exchanging loving mellows with me. So our way of living as spirit, this is our method. This is our method of you're not the body. Our method of not being the body is to live like a siddhadeha with our material deha until it becomes spiritualized and we actually get a siddhadeha. Our method of not being the body is to live like a spiritual body that is engaged in the service of Krishna. It begins at the time of Diksha and Krishna desiring to do something special for you in the form of spiritualizing the body and making it fit for receiving the gift of the siddhadeha. So that is our practical way of, you know, experiencing like on a visceral level what it's like to live as spirit. So that means hearing Harikatha and chanting Harikirtan and remembering Krishna. This is how siddhadehas, this is how they exist. That is practical. That is the practical existence of this, you know, siddhadehas. Cooking for Krishna, serving Krishna, whatever you cook, dressing nicely for Krishna, etc. This is how we live as spirit. That's how Prabhupada's always talked about it. Of course, when you read it in Prabhupada's purport, it sounds rather simplistic. And so it may not strike you as something particularly deep, but for me, it's kind of a deep meditation. How do I viscerally feel that I'm not the body? Like, yeah, I know I'm not the body, but that information isn't gonna, well, you live like a Siddhaya. That's how you should live your life. And if you do it, then gradually, the visceral feeling of being spirit becomes more and more, the whole psychic, feeling is psychic, right? The whole psychic realm becomes infused with that bhava, with that feeling of, that is the result of living like a spiritual body, how a spiritual body lives. So that's my way of, it's a very Prabhupada-esque answer, but with a little bit of, mixed in with my own sort of whatever way of saying.
Just a quick appreciation of that response, of that answer. You shed a lot of light on concepts that have been in my awareness for a long time, but you really shed a lot of new light, especially the way you were describing the idea of living as with a spiritual body while we're in the material world. It's like, the way that's like sort of in a way you translate Seva Sadhaka Rupena, but in a very different kind of way, and you did it very, because this whole idea of like, for those who want to merge into Brahman, they try to create that experience in this world. For those who want to become jnanis and, meet the impersonal absolute, they try to create that experience in this world. So we're trying to meet Krishna and Goloka Vrindavan, so we have to create that experience in this world, right? Using our material body. So it makes perfect sense. The way you put it down is that, yes, with the material body, we try to live as if we're in the spiritual world, as if, as much as we can, and then try to go for that 24 hours of absorption. And when that is complete, then at that point, so it's, thank you for that answer.
There's a meaning of Kriti Sadhya. This is what Sadhana Bhakti is. Kriti Sadhya. With the physical apparatus that you have now, you're basically emulating the Sadhya. Kriti Sadhya. The word Kriti refers to the actions of the senses and body and mind. Kriti, Sadhya. So you're basically emulating the Sadhya with the apparatus that you have now. Kriti Sadhya, but that Sadhya Bhava until the manifestation of Bhav Bhakti, which is the actual Sadhya of Sadhana Bhakti. Sadhana Bhakti. This is Sadhana Bhakti. And not Prabhupada, Krishna says in chapter 29 of the 11th canto, and Sri Vishwanath says that he says this verse is the essence of the Bhagavatam, and it should be worn around our neck like a locket. Like a lover wears a locket, we should wear this verse around our neck. It's verse number, it's 30 something, I think. No. Where is that verse? Hold on. Y'all know what verse? He said, this is the intelligence of the intelligence and the clever of the clever. 22. Okay. Yeah, this verse is also important. 11:29-22. Esha buddhi matam buddhir manisha chamanisha. This is the intelligence of the intelligent and the cleverness of the clever. What is that? That by that in this very life, one makes use of the temporary and the unreal, the material body, to achieve the eternal reality. So that which is temporary and unreal means here today and gone tomorrow. You use that to gain the eternal and the real. Yeah, that's clever. That's intelligent. So Sri Vishwanath says this verse is like one of the essences of Bhagavatam, apparently. So it's an interesting reflection. So devotees are clever like this. All right, I'm gonna live like the Siddhadehas are living. And that way I'll feel myself as spirit. And then that feeling becomes very strong. Then it links up with Bhav Bhakti and then become perfect. Life is good. Okay. Siddhahari has something. It looks like. Maybe he went to go and cook something.
No, I'm here. Hare Krishna. I was cooking. The question I had was this, that you gave that verse which is given there in regards to which you explained regarding the category and the object, like how if a cow dies, the cowness doesn't die. Now, I don't care if the cowness dies or not. I care about the cow, so I'm not sure how that example is relevant, If the cowness keeps on existing or not existing, doesn't matter to me. I care about the cow.
the point in context is there's an eternal category, jati, and then there's things that manifest as specifications of that eternal category, vyakti. So these, and the example, so, and there's a distinction between the two. So in the example, as it relates to what Angita Rishi is saying, the jivas are eternal and their bodies are like a specific manifestation, vyakti, so to speak. That's the comparison as I was able to, that was what I was able to understand. I hope I understood it properly. So even though the body disappears, the jiva does not disappear. That's the idea. So even though the cow disappears, the cowness, which is eternal, does not disappear. So your statement is like, yeah, but I'm attached to a specific cow, and that's why I'm lamenting. So yeah, that is the issue. Aviveka krita pura. That is the issue.
So are we saying that cowness is a property of the soul, or
No. There's a limitation of the analogy here. The comparison is that the jati is eternal and the vyakti is not eternal. So the jiva is eternal and the body is temporary. That's the comparison that's being drawn here.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So, and because of aviveka krita, because of ignorance, we don't see that distinction between the two, the eternal category and the temporary manifestations. And so we conflate the two, and the result of that conflation is sorrow. So that's what he's saying. So we conflate the soul with the body, and the result is sorrow. That's what he's trying to say. That's how it make out there.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu.
So anyone else wants to say anything? Maybe Athena says she has something yesterday. I guess we can take that if you like. Otherwise, we can end now also. Quite all right.
Krishna, thank you so much. Sorry, a little bit of context switching. I just came from like a business networking event, so trying to ground a little bit. I'm like, I'm like hearing anything. I'm sorry. So my question yesterday was really related so as I mentioned, trying to connect with this kind of Buddhist person to speak a little bit more about our philosophy. And he sent me a book and I started reading it. And it's just very interesting because, I don't know too much about Buddhism, but, it's very centered around the self. Mm-hmm. And while, you can't really speak for sure, we would probably say that their destination is the Brahma Jyoti, kind of this nirvana and enlightenment. And it's just interesting because I would say their path is very much towards self-realization. And while we also say that as well, like you would say in that book, The Science of Self-Realization, and our explanation is when you realize the self, you realize God, because there, in one sense, you can't realize the self unless you realize God as part and parcel. And as ISKCON says, that then we're a servant of God. But it's very interesting because, as I think about it, we're less like our focus isn't self-realization. Our focus is on God realization. And while self-realization kind of in Brahma Jyoti is an aspect of God realization, you're realizing kind of like the lowest level or aspect of God. It's just kind of interesting. I would just say like our focus is realizing God to its fullest extent. And I don't know, I just really I would just love to hear your thoughts on that. And I would even say like our goal isn't self-realization, it's God realization.
Well, I'll take it a step further and say our goal isn't God realization, it's prema.
That's right. And loving devotional service to God. Yes. In that context, though, even realizing God to its fullest extent, we therefore have loving reciprocation and devotional service to God. But yeah, it was just a thought, because as you kind of put self-realization in different contexts of, say, a different religion, it's weird because we say self-realization, but it's not really, it doesn't feel right. Like that's really not so much our goal. And we are realizing the self in relation to God, but it's, God realization and prema and loving devotional service to God. I don't know. I just, wanted to share and also get your thoughts if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, I stick to our goal is not even God realization. Our goal is prema. We will only find God in prema, not anywhere else. So we also don't say that the prayojana is to realize Krishna. We say that the prayojana is Krishna prema. Prayojana is bhav bhakti, a certain sthai bhav, dasya bhav, sakya bhav, vatsalya bhava, madhurya bhava. That is the goal of a devotee of Krishna. Sadhaka, that is to say. That is our goal.
Yep. Thank you so much, Jay.
Okay, and I have a few things that I asked in the chat, if you've seen the chat. Oh, oops, did I miss it? I scrolled all the way up. Hari Radha. Is it true that unless we are imbued by the internal potency of the Lord, we cannot think of not being a body? That's correct. Example of Madhurya Kadambini. Evolution of ego completes at the time of prema, and hence it seems we will continue to think of ourselves as body, material, but not fully spiritual. Yeah. I don't know if this analogy is perfect, but I like to use it. I say, just if you think of love of God, God is like the sun, and love of God is like the sunshine. So when we stand in the sun, our body begins to become hot because of the ingress of heat coming from the sun rays. And the longer we stand outside, the hotter the body becomes. It becomes more and more and more hot. So as we stand, you can say, stand in the crucible of Krishna bhakti, then the body and the psychic, body means everything, the psychic realm, all that, it becomes more and more hot or imbued with because of the ingress of internal energy. And that is the cause of the transformation of the inner world and the ability to relinquish Maya. Because where there is light, there cannot be darkness, and so on. So you could say like that, makes sense. Another question is, when Narada and Angita came to the king and offered him knowledge, he got it probably once and for all. We are also told many times by sadhus. Why did we not get it? I don't know. The Bhagavatam, this is, in one sense, this is the challenge of this hearing sacred texts, is that we don't get let's say, the full story, so to speak, of the transformation of these persons. They have not written any journals, at least none that we have access to, of like their struggles and how they heard this and it took them some time to really integrate it, and they're finally integrated. Or maybe because these kings they're in previous yugas where they're already like highly intelligent and kind of from an empirical level just highly evolved humans, although albeit not bhaktas, just highly evolved humans. And so for them to hear and like reflect and integrate was a more efficient process than it is for the residents of Kali Yuga. I don't know, it can be any one of these factors. One factor being we don't get the full history of their transformation. That's why I say, devotees, if any of us makes any tangible progress in this life, it would be a great act of kindness to write like a memoir of that process of transformation for posterity. Not as probably have it published after you die so no one will think that you're arrogant, this, that, and the other. But it would be nice to have manuals or memoirs where devotees speak about the development of their Krishna consciousness in real time, so that we may have a realistic view of our own journey or in the sort of things we might go through. That would be a great kindness. So we don't have a lot of those things here. So that, you can say in some sense, that's some of the work that might go on in the future of the parampara. It seems to be like a need that might or should be there anyway. Or else they're just highly evolved humans, and so the process of integration is a lot more efficient than for us who are like barely humans in the age of Kali. and becoming more and more or less and less human with the rise of the technological revolution and all that, becoming less and less human. And people are even, some people at least, are even looking forward to or proud of becoming transhuman, where their brains are hooked up to computers and like this. So big issue. So the process of integrating this has become a lot less efficient. And Siddhartha says, I've been asking for those memoirs. Andrew Prabhu's book is very inspiring in this regard, absolutely. Although his is more a truncated presentation. Yeah, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur did it right, but only first half. It's very rough English. I tried to read it. I need a dictionary. In any case, that's the answers that I got for that. I don't know if I have a better answer than that. Maybe if I reflect a little bit more, I could think of something else, but that's what comes to mind right away. But I do feel your pain of the slow integration of these ideas. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we get out of Krishna consciousness what we put into it. You know, if we have to analyze our surrender, for example, then a lot of us could probably do a lot better in that basic category of devotion. And, you know, as Jiva Goswami writes about this in Bhakti Sandarbha, according to the degree of surrender, to that degree, there is the reciprocation. So, yeah, we might have to sit down and reflect on the nature of our surrender. And not just like, not like I check all the rules, like I'm following everything. I got everything I need to do and I've done it. And then I also have my other life, you know, I can live my life in. But like really surrender, you know, there are a lot of things to reflect on deeply. And that could give insight to why the integration process is so slow. I asked this question regarding lack of memoirs to Hari Parshada Das. He said that Rag Marg is not a public process. It's meant to be transferred person to person. That's okay. So at least that person who's transferring it, he may give a memoir for his disciples. Because I remember following up that question, that my question was Narottam Das Thakur is given Prarthana. Rupa Goswami, Ukali Kabbalari, Raghunath Das Goswami, Stavavali. And I said, these things are like kind of like a report of their inner life. And he said, well, at that time, there wasn't like wide proliferation of these literatures. He said, only the disciples had them. I said, okay, but at least the disciples had them. And that's my point. At least someone had it, you know, the disciples, so they could derive inspiration. Now, of course, we don't hear in those literatures about their turmoils and troubles on the way toward prema. So it'd be nice to have that. And that's not exactly Rag Marg. That's just like spiritual life. You know, what sort of struggles did you go through? How did you overcome them? You know, we could use insight in that regard as well. So anyway, the sadhus can do as they like. They're fully independent. So, or else we have to become those sadhus and help serve the parampara in this way. Okay, anything else? There was some message that went viral in ISKCON about Srila Radhanath Swami's internal swarup, and it met with criticism. Yeah, obviously, because that sort of thing, that's why I said you have those sorts of things you have to write right before you leave the body. Or you write it, and then right before you leave the body, you're like, yeah, I wrote this thing. And then let the disciples print it afterward. But you can't be alive when that stuff gets published because the envy is too strong. It will create disturbance in the minds of those who don't have faith in those personalities. So you write it, but it is not known. And then after you leave the world, let someone discover it and then propagate. That is okay. But are you walking around talking about, I had a Gopi Swarup, this, that, and other, and then you'll get criticized. But like Siddhartha said, this is one thing that's very inspiring about Andrew Prabhu's book. but that book didn't really, the book got published before he left, but it didn't get distributed until after he left. It got published while he was alive, but there was big politics because of, that one Prabhupada disappearance day. They really wanted to kick him out of ISKCON Vrindavan. So politics became particularly severe. So after that, he started chanting 2 lakh Nam every day. After that event, he started chanting 2 lakh Nam every day because it was becoming extremely intense and the antagonism was high. And then shortly after that, so this is 2009. It got published, Govardhan Puja 2009, because I asked him. And then when I went to my Guru Maharaj's Mayapur Yatra, I came back toward the end of Kartik. The book was supposed to have been published on Govardhan Puja. So I asked him about the book, and he said there was some trouble. That time I didn't know what happened. So he told me there was some trouble, and he was like, anyway, he kind of almost dismissed it. And then short time after, so that's 2009. So that's October 2009. And then he leaves his body in July of the next year, so a few months later, basically. And then only after he leaves his body, those who were dedicated to him or who have faith in him, then they saw to the distribution of the books. So that's usually how the cookie has to crumble. So anyway, we can only be so powerful that our lives would have that much meaning that we could write such a thing that would be meaningful for future souls in the path. So this speaks to the need of a disciple to get really close to a spiritual master. Yeah, I mean, or some sadhu, so you can get that mercy. When we meet challenges in life, just increase chanting, like Ayendra. Yeah, that might be one message that we take from this life. Okay, so we'll pause here for today, and hopefully we'll continue tomorrow. See Chitraketu's response to all that he's heard from Angita Rishi and Chitraketu. Hari Om Tat Sat, thanks a lot. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Go.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.